and Amy, and we'd like to thank the Trails Trust for the opportunity to talk to people that would like to learn a little bit more about goatheads. I have a bunch of pictures of goatheads that I'd like to show you, so I'm gonna share my screen and share a PowerPoint presentation with you. And at any point, if you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask. If can't promise to have the answers, but I'll certainly do my best. Let me pull up, make sure I get a laser pointer here, so I can show you things. So this is a picture of a goathead vine, and we're really hoping that, you know, throughout the next couple of years, we can put a dent in the goathead population here in Susanville. They're really a nasty plant that we have all over Lassen County. And they're a problem mainly because of the fruits that they produce. You know, the thorns. Most people on this call, I don't have to tell you that these thorns can be very problematic. Popping bike tires, being problematic for pets, being problematic for me personally. I know that I've tracked some goatheads in my house, and it hurts when you step on one of those in the middle of the night. They're worse than Lego for sure. And it is a C-list noxious weed species in California, so it's one of the species that the state has deemed to be problematic for both agriculture and the environment. So I'm going to go through a few things in this presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about integrated pest management, and then I'm going to talk about goatheads, how to identify them, their biology, and specifically how to control the goatheads using a variety of different methods. Then I'm going to show a little bit of information from a research project that I had looking at various goathead control. And there's a bunch of good information about goatheads, you know, outside of this presentation on the UC Integrated Pest Management website, as well as the Weed Research and Information Center. So a shameless plug for some university resources. So what is integrated pest management? Integrated pest management is this idea of using multiple management tactics to bring a pest population to a manageable level or an acceptable level of control. And what the integrated pest management program really relies upon is arming yourself with information about the pest, being able to identify that pest and differentiate it from other pests or other plants that may not be problematic, so that you can learn about that pest and really target the weaknesses and the biology of that pest so that you can get the most bang for your buck in your control efforts. So when it comes to identifying goatheads, you know, most people are probably familiar with goatheads and how to identify them at a lot of different growth stages, but just about everybody can tell you what they are when they're this big viney plant. You know, really spread out, low growing on the soil surface. They have red stems. And a distinguishing characteristic compared to many of the species that are viney and grow in a similar form are that they have pinnately compound leaves, or little leaflets that I'll show some more close-up pictures of in a second. But they really have the ability to grow in areas where there's not a lot of competition from other vegetation, growing prostate or right next to the ground, forming dense mats where they produce a tremendous amount of these seed pods that break into those really nasty spiny seeds that nobody really likes. But the big thing with goatheads is you need to be able to identify them when they're a seedling, before the plant starts to flower and before the plant has really put on any seeds, because that's when they're most easily controlled, and that's when you're going to have the most success controlling them, is when they're in the seedling growth stage. So here's a picture of a seedling that I pulled out of a field trial just a couple of days ago, where you can start to see the pinnately compound leaves with these individual leaflets. It's a very hairy plant. There's hairs on the leaves and hairs on the stems. And I'd like to point out that the first leaves on the goatheads don't look like the normal leaves. They're actually not leaves, but they're cotyledons, and these will fall off the plant. But when the plant first comes out of the ground, These are the first two green things you'll see, and then you know, eventually you'll start to see those pinnately compound leaves. And this is when you need to be able to identify the plant and be able to control it, because at this point you can just grab it with 2 fingers, pull it out of the ground, and it's dead. Very easy to control when they're at this growth stage, either with mechanical or with chemical means. Picture of the seedlings, you know, with a few more leaves on them, where you can really see those distinctive hairs and those distinctive leaves. Most plants don't have leaves like this, and it's a relatively unique plant. Here at a field edge, some goathead seedlings just coming out of the ground. They often grow on bare soil, and you know, after a couple of weeks, they'll start to put on little yellow flowers. They don't have to be really big in order to flower. It's thought that they start to flower just a couple of weeks after coming out of the ground, and as soon as they start to flower, you know, you're going to be seeing seeds in a couple of weeks. So ideally, you want to control goatheads before you ever see the flowers. You want to get after them when they're just in that seedling growth stage. Close up of the flower, for those that like to see pretty pictures, this is a picture I stole off of Calflora. 5-petaled yellow flower. And eventually, if you let them grow and you don't pull them when they're in the seedling stage, you get these dense mats of goatheads that'll just completely cover the ground where there's not other vegetation. And, you know, the red stems are relatively distinctive. And then the picture from my title slide, a picture of those nice seeds, where you have these seed pods that then will, you know, break up into 5 or 6 different capsules. And then you get the seeds which are problematic and pokey and what nobody really likes to see. I wanted to include one look-alike in here, a plant that's pretty common on some of the baseball fields around town, and I've had a lot of questions about what it is, and people think it's goatheads. This is a plant called prostate knotweed. It grows in a very similar fashion, right next to low to the ground. It grows really well in areas that are bare dirt, but it doesn't have nasty seeds to be worried about. It's still a weedy species, but it's not a noxious species like goatheads are. Its leaves are entire. They're not divided, and they come right off the stem. So, you know, it's not that fern-like type leaf, and they have flowers, little pink flowers. They don't have yellow flowers. So just another picture of the knotweed. This is one that we have very common throughout Susanville, and it's not a goathead, but grows pretty similarly. So in terms of the biology of goatheads, it's a summer annual species. So annual species means that it only comes from seed. It doesn't reproduce by root. It only reproduces by seed. So if you're able to keep it from going to seed, you can eventually eliminate it. Goatheads don't like warm or cold temperatures. They're really intolerant to frost. If you have a frost come through, typically that'll kill goathead seedlings that are up. They typically don't start to germinate until mid-May, and then they'll germinate all throughout the summer in flushes. You know, being a wild plant, it's you know, not like many of our crop plants that if you put in the ground, they'll all germinate at once. Goatheads will germinate throughout the summertime, starting in May, and they'll have flushes of germination every time you have a rain, you know, all the way through August and September, which does make it challenging. You can't just go out and control the plants once. You have to go out multiple times during the growing season so that you can continue to get those seedlings that continue to come up. Goatheads are a prolific seed producer. You can have a large plant produce upwards of 3,000 seeds per plant if you let it get big and large. You know, I saw some goathead plants out in Colorado, where I'm from, out in cornfields in the eastern part of the state, you know, on corn field edges that grew to 12 feet in diameter. The vines would go out 6 feet on both sides, and it was quite impressive. But the big thing with goatheads is that the seeds have a 3 to 6 year soil seed life. So if you let one plant go to seed, that means that you're going to be dealing with that plant for the next 3 to 6 years on that site. So it's really important to keep those plants from going to seed if you're trying to get ahead of the population. In terms of where it grows, you know, it grows in generally very sandy soils, roadsides, very compacted areas, disturbed areas, driveways, sidewalks, vacant lots. It doesn't really like to compete with other vegetation. You know, it'll compete a little bit and grow here and there, but really if you have other competitive vegetation growing on the ground, you're not going to have a lot of goat heads. It really likes those very disturbed areas, and it does quite well. Goat heads move around the landscape quite prolifically with us and with our animals. You know, with their seeds, it's really an ingenious way to get caught in, you know, animals' feet and fur, as well as our tires and our shoes. And we're really the problem moving this plant around the landscape. And it's important to think about how this plant moves in order to try to get control of it. You know, if you're continually bringing in seeds from outside. In terms of controlling goat heads, it's not that difficult of a plant to kill if you get it in the seedling growth stage and you're able to keep up with it. In terms of some you know, physical things that you can do to control goat heads, there's mulches can be effective to create a barrier where you had a goat head patch. As long as you create a barrier that's at least, you know, 3 to 4 inches thick, that's really going to prevent any light from getting down to the soil surface, because it's that light at the soil surface which encourages the seeds to germinate. Synthetic weed mats can also be useful for this means. Although if you bring in goat heads, you know, on top of a mulch, oftentimes they will continue to grow on top of that mulch, but it can be something useful. They're actually very susceptible to mechanical control, especially at low populations. If you hand pull goat heads, they will die. They will not reroot. You need to get, you know, down just below the soil surface a little bit and a little bit of root, but they're not a plant that's going to re-sprout. So they're very susceptible to hoeing, scraping, areas that are cultivated, and hand pulling. But all of these mechanical methods, while very effective, need to happen before the plants start to flower. If the plants are in the middle of flowering and you pull them and you just lay them on the soil surface, you can actually still get seed production and seed set, because the plant will just put all of its energy in trying to produce seeds in those flowers that it already had. So it's really important, you know, being a weed person, timing is everything. It's really important to get out there when they're seedlings. You know, if the plant's already flowering, or if you start to see any sort of seed pod on that plant, if you pull it or you hoe it, you really need to bag that plant and dispose of it. Otherwise, you haven't really done any good, and that plant is gonna go to seed. In an area that you know that you have a lot of seeds, something that you know, a tip for goat heads with those spiny seeds is to use this dispersal mechanism against it, and to use, you know, a piece of old carpet padding or styrofoam, and you can put it on the ground and press it down and actually pick up a lot of those seeds. You know, the mat will get laden with seeds, and then you can throw that away. And the land trust is kind enough. They actually have some old carpet padding out at their property, free to the public at this point, for those who'd like to grab some and try to pick up some goat head seeds where they know they have big patches of it. The big thing with goat heads is that they germinate in multiple flushes throughout the summer, especially if we have thunderstorms throughout the summer. So anywhere where you know you have goat heads, you want to go out and check those patches every 2 to 3 weeks to make sure that you're not missing some seedlings out there and letting them go to seed. In terms of integrated pest management, oftentimes biological control methods are very useful at suppressing populations. And if we lived in a warmer climate, there's a seed head weevil that actually is very effective for suppressing goat head seed production. Very effective down in the Central Valley of California and down in Arizona. But unfortunately, this seed head weevil does not survive our cold winters. It's been introduced into Lassen County a couple of different times by the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and it hasn't persisted. So unfortunately, it's not a tool for us, but have got some questions about where to buy them. And you can buy them online, but it's something that you'd have to buy every year, and it's only going to offer you suppression, not control, as the population doesn't persist. In terms of what you can do for, you know, cultural control methods, we really do have the ability in some instances to help limit the distribution of this plant by making sure to clean our shoes and our tires where we know we've gone through a goat head patch, you know, to keep spreading them, you know, all over town. Not that everybody's going to do this, but this is something that you know, can be helpful. Another thing that can be helpful in areas, obviously not areas this is applicable to, but in areas where you do have water and you have the ability to plant competitive species, if you plant, a competitive grass or forb and you give it lots of water and fertilizer, the goat heads aren't going to be able to compete with anything that has a relatively high canopy structure and is able to shade out that soil surface. Goat heads typically aren't a problem in a very nice, lush, irrigated yard, where they are very problematic, in those abandoned lots around town. And then there's chemical control, which some people like and other people don't, but it can be effective, especially in areas that you have very large patches. And whenever you use a chemical, it's important to make sure to follow the label, because the label is the law. Pesticides are one of the most heavily regulated compounds in the United States, both by the EPA and the Department of Pesticide Regulation here in California. There's a lot of research that goes into these labels to make sure that if you follow the label, you're not going to have undue impact on the environment or yourself. So it's just very important to read that whole label if you are going to choose to use a pesticide. In terms of products that can be utilized for homeowners that are effective against goat heads, I broke this list down into products that have post-emergent activity, or products that will control goat heads that are up and actively growing at the time of application, and then products that you can put down to help suppress seed growth. So some common products that you can just go down and buy at ACE. Glyphosate, one that's always in the news, or Roundup is a product that will control just about anything that's actively growing. It controls most green material, and it is very effective for goat heads, especially when they're small and even when they're large. The interesting fact about glyphosate is that it has it doesn't really have any soil activity. It's a very sticky substance. It sticks to the soil, so that if you make an application of glyphosate, you're not going to control any of the seeds in the seed bank, which is good if you're planning on coming back and planting a garden or a crop right after you make an application. But this is bad for goat heads in the sense that you'll control all the goat heads that are up and actively growing, but you're not going to control any of those seeds in the seed bank, so you're going to get continued germination throughout the summer. 2,4-D and dicamba are other products that won't kill grasses, but are very effective on broadleaf plants and very effective on goat heads. And you can buy these products at ACE, and they won't leave bare soil like glyphosate will. But these products do have potential to move around when it's really hot outside. So you don't want to make applications of these products if it's more than 75 degrees. And then there's a whole list of products that will give you control of the seedlings. They won't give you control of the plants once they're up and actively growing. But if you put these products out earlier in the growing season before the goat heads start to grow, you can get control of that seed bank. And then there's some different options for ranchers, but I just listed some homeowner products. And I get a lot of questions about vinegar. A lot of people want to use vinegar to control weeds. There's a lot of information on the internet about vinegar. And it can be used to control weeds. It's an organic option. The active ingredient in vinegar is acetic acid. It can be used to control very young seedlings. Typically less than 3 inches in size is what most of these acetic acid or vinegar labels say. But the vinegar that you buy as a pesticide is different than the vinegar that you buy on your grocery shelf. You really need about 15% acetic acid to be effective to control plants. Essentially what it does is you spray it when it's hot, and it'll actually just disintegrate and melt those cells because it's so caustic and so acidic. So, the stuff you buy off the shelf in the supermarket is only about 5% acetic acid, and from the studies I've seen, it doesn't work very well. The downside with these high concentration vinegars, you can buy industrial strength vinegar online, no problem, 20%. That can be effective, but oftentimes these products that you buy online aren't actually labeled pesticides. They haven't gone through this registration process, so they don't have to have the necessarily labeling because they're not being marketed as a pesticide. They're just being marketed as industrial strength cleaning product. But the ones that are 15 to 20% acetic acid that are marketed as a pesticide have all sorts of language on the labels about how dangerous they are. Any product that's over 11% acetic acid will actually cause skin burning, irreversible eye damage. It can cause blindness. So in order to get above that 15% that you need for weed control, you're going to be dealing with a very dangerous product that, if it is a pesticide, will require the use of goggles, face shields, respirators, coveralls, all those things. So it can be a very effective organic option for small seedlings, but it's just because it's organic doesn't mean it's not dangerous. And specifically with acetic acid, it is something that's quite dangerous. And I'll get off my soapbox now, but I get a lot of questions about vinegar and whether or not it'll control weeds. So also, with herbicides, it's important to get out there and check those patches multiple times per year. So I did have a trial looking at some different herbicides to see if we could get long-term control of goatheads. Had a trial out in Litchfield where I had some plots that I put out. Didn't have a lot of precipitation after the plots were put out, so we didn't have a lot of flushes of seeds. But since I included a couple of products that are available down at ACE, I thought it'd be interesting to show you some data. So this is a graph that shows the goathead control 7 days after treatment. So the higher the bar, the more goathead control. Nothing offered 100% control, but some of these treatments looked really good compared to that untreated check. Here's a picture of the trial, very dry, dusty site. Full of cheatgrass. The owner came through and mowed it, and then he had a bunch of goatheads come in. Here's a picture of the untreated check 7 days after treatment. This was applied in mid-June, so the seedlings were very small. Zoomed in, this is the untreated check, probably 10 or 12 goathead seedlings per square foot. Here's a picture of a Durazone treatment or a Roundup plus Esplanade or Indaziflam, where we had almost 100% goathead control. And if you zoom up, you can see all those dead seedlings that were controlled by that Roundup application. 90 days after treatment, again, many of our treatments, offered a pretty good control, but again, nothing was offering 100% control. This product, Prowl, is one that you can get, or a pendimethalin product that you can get at ACE. This product, the Panoramic plus Roundup, is a Roundup extended control. And 90 days out, we're getting pretty good suppression, not great suppression. And then this is that Durazone product that you can buy down at Ace Hardware. Given about 85% control 3 months after treatment. So pretty much the entire summer. So a picture of an untreated check where we have a solid mat of goatheads. And then here's a picture of that Roundup Extend in one of the treatments where we had almost 100% control in this replication. Some of the other replications didn't look as good. And here's another untreated versus a product that is available to ranchers where we got excellent goathead control. 14 months after treatment, so the following year, a full year out from treatment, really the product that probably looked the best that was giving us about 80% control was that Durazone product. And then the product that had that Prowl in it was also doing okay in terms of the two products that you can get on this treatment list, for a homeowner here in town. So 4 products that you can get, for pre-emergent. Here's a whole list of them. There's a bunch of preen products that include pendimethalin or trifluralin or razelin, all which will help inhibit those seedlings from germinating. And then there's, some products that'll really give you long-term weed control in some of your driveways and sidewalks and those sorts of things. This is the one that looked the best in that trial, that Durazone product. But you really don't need herbicides for goatheads if you have small patches. You just need persistence. You need to get out there and pull some goatheads or hoe some goatheads. Physical methods can be very, very effective on goatheads. You just got to keep up with it, for a couple times in the summer for, 3 to 4 years, and you should be able to make some good work of them, and after 1 or 2 years, really reduce our populations down to a manageable level where you're not going to have to pull that many. So with that, I'd take any questions if there are any.
What about fire?
What about fire? That's a good
Yes.
question. In terms of like one of those propane burners?
I have something called a dragon torch, and it's a propane contraption that hooks up to this
Yeah.
funnel thing, and my husband says I'm dangerous, but will that help?
So that's a good question. I have not seen any data specifically on those propane torches and goat heads. However, I have seen people using them, and I do have some experience with those torches just generally. I would say that if you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of dry grass and those sorts of things, and it is a time of year that it's safe to use fire, the difficult thing with goat heads is that by the time they germinate, it's often starting to get dry, right about now. So that can be a kind of a dangerous thing. But, if it's kind of a wet spring and you're starting to see some, yeah, fire will kill those small seedlings. It's not something that's going to work well on those big mats, unless you're really going to toast them. And by the time they grow really big, you're going to have, trouble with the fire conditions being right. But, for those small seedlings in areas where you, can use fire safely, it will kill those seedlings. I don't know if you're going to get much effect on the seed bank. I don't know if with those propane torches, if you're going to be able to heat that soil hot enough, deep enough to really kill the seeds, down in the soil. So, it could be an option for early season control where well safe, but I think you're probably still going to have some of those seeds germinate throughout the summertime. But that's just a guess from other work that I've seen with those torches.
What about burning the stickers?
So
Hello?
I think if the stickers are on the soil surface, in the fall, you'd probably be able to get pretty decent kill of those stickers as long as, you're going to really be holding that flame on them for quite a while. So, you're definitely going to have to be using quite a bit of propane and getting them pretty hot to kill those stickers with fire. It's not something you're just going to be able to wave over the top. But if you do actually toast it, you should be able to kill them.
Okay, thank you.
You recommended Durazone, correct?
So not necessarily recommending the Durazone. It's just what worked best in the trial that I had out in Litchfield.
Okay, the other thing is there a local number up here in Susanville where you can call like a city official or something like that and say, hey, there's a mess of goat heads along here. Can you send somebody out to eradicate them?
So I really wish there was. To my understanding, goat heads, well, they are a noxious weed. They're a very low priority noxious weed. So the county will come out and help you cost share and spray for A-list species, the ones that the state is trying to eradicate. But since goat heads are so widespread throughout California, they're really just encouraged to be managed. And to my understanding, the city is not actively trying to control the goat head population. They're really leaving it up to us, the citizens, to help control it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
There are some products that we could get in Reno. Would you recommend any of those?
I would not recommend using anything that's not labeled in the state of California as a legal pesticide. Even though you can go buy something over the border in Nevada, and bring it over here and make an application. We really do have plenty of products here in California that can work for goat heads if applied at the right time. If you have a specific product or a specific land area in mind that you're thinking about trying to figure out how to control the goat heads on that property, I certainly would have no problem talking with you further about specific recommendations for what might be helpful.
Okay.
If you want to write down my number, feel free.
Tom, this is great presentation. I was just wondering, do you know much about like years like this where it's kind of a drought year? Do they not germinate as much? Or I mentioned I haven't been seeing them in my yard, and I have been pulling them, but I'm wondering too if it has to do with just lack of precipitation and they're just not germinating.
That's a really good question. If they do like it very dry, they do need some water to grow and germinate. So, in a really dry year that we've had with a really dry spring, I wouldn't be surprised that we won't really see the big flushes of goat heads where we don't have any irrigation until we get some thunderstorms, if we end up actually getting any thunderstorms. But I'm not positive exactly how much precipitation you need, whether 1/10 of an inch is enough to do it or 1/4 of an inch, or if you really need more like 1/2 inch to get them to germinate. But they do like it dry.
What about using salt, like Epsom salt?
So that's a good question. Salt is actually the oldest herbicide there is. Romans used to salt the fields of their enemies and no crops would grow. You can put salt down and it will kill plants, but it will kill all plants. And it will kill all plants for a long time until that salt is, flushed out of the system, which in an arid climate like we live in isn't going to happen.
But if it's on like a roadway where nothing is used but weeds and you don't want anything growing, wouldn't salt or what about rock salt? Wouldn't that work too?
It certainly could. But technically, we're not supposed to use things that are not labeled as a pesticide, because as I was mentioning, pesticides are one of the most heavily regulated things in our country. Because if you start using all kinds of different chemicals, salt is a chemical, you can have negative impacts. You can have that salt leach off that roadway and kill vegetation on the side of the roadway. And if you're looking for bare ground on a roadway, there's plenty of products that you can apply at much lower use rates and probably more economically effective than salt.
Okay.
But, in terms of the homeowner, if you put salt down, it will kill plants.
Very good presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem at all. And if any other questions pop up, feel free to shoot me a call when you got my office number there. I'm not in the office very much in the summer, but I'll make sure to get back to you.
What was that phone number again?
It's 530-251-2650.
Thank you, Tom.
No problem at all. I appreciate you all coming in. Hopefully we can get out and kill some goat heads.
Definitely.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tom, and thank you all for joining us this evening. We'll wrap it up there, but there is a lot of good information. Tom's happy to help out if you have specific questions about some treatment on your property. And there's also a lot of information on the Cooperative Extension Lassen's website, which Tom has put up there, and the links to the information will be up there. And we will also share this. We recorded the meeting, so we'll put that up as well. So keep an eye out for the goat heads and encourage your neighbors to keep an eye out. And if we all work together and pick up what we see, I think we can get it a lot better situation for all our feet and tires, definitely. So
Definitely.
yeah, thank you all for coming, and
Thank you.
we'll see you a different time.
All right.